because I was like, I'm going to bring everything to the table for this kid. And I don't care if anybody calls me a witch or, whatever they want to call me. I'm going to bring crystals in and I'm going to call on archangels and I'm going to be doing different energetic work around him. And I don't care what people say about me because
Right.
I'm going to give this kid everything I have. And when he came out of a coma and got out of that experience, because he had to relearn how to walk, and it was a very traumatic experience for him, and it still is, even though he's now 21 years old.
All right, welcome to Fortune and Romance with your host, Taylor Fortune. And unfortunately, BA is out today, guys. I am so sorry you were stuck with me and our guest today. We're going to try to have as much fun as possible. Kat is awesome. So today I have my guest here, alchemist and astrologer, Kat Delaney. Okay. Kat, say hi to everybody.
Hello, thank you so much for welcoming me today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to what we're going to develop here today. Hi, everybody.
I think we got a little bit of lag in there, but that's okay because I can edit that out. So we're just going to start kind of deep right away. I do this with a lot of people, and it kind of gets us warmed up. Kat, tell us about a very dark and mystical experience that kick-started your whole spiritual awakening process.
I think it's, if we're going to go deep right away, we'll go deep right away in honor of the season of Halloween and the Day of the Dead, losing someone really close to me and experiencing death was probably the most transformative experience for me myself, because it really put into perspective this thing that we call time and our sense of how much time we have and our willingness and kind of conditioning to put a lot of our dreams and our aspirations into this place in the future when everything lines up, when in reality we actually have less time tomorrow than we do today. And so I got that greatest experience and that teaching through the loss of my mom. And so I would say that gave me probably the biggest spiritual awakening that I've had, because time is like the keeper of our experience.
Yeah, that's a really good, interesting answer. I mean, I'm sorry to hear about that. I think that's a pretty common theme in spirituality is, the awakening process through trauma. Moms, of course, are probably arguably one of the most traumatic things that can happen in anybody's life. Either mom or like a lover, your husband or wife. I've had 2 different girlfriends pass away in my life, so I've experienced a little bit of that. But how old were you when that happened with your mom?
It was right around the time of my Saturn return, and I have Saturn sitting in my first house, so it was a very in-depth reflection on my sense of self and where I felt my mom's placement could be and where could she actually show up in my life, because that was limited by this factor of actual time. And because just a few years before my mom passed away, I had an awareness around how important it was to forgive her for trauma that had happened throughout my upbringing, between her relationship with my dad and them being divorced, and the trauma that kids go through when they have to choose a parent to be raised by, and parents play games with. But I realized in my early 20s that every time I spoke about my mom, I felt this sense of agitation and tension in my body. And I didn't want to feel that every time that I talked about my mom. And so I had to forgive her. And that ability to let go of all of my accounts that I had with my mom, that I had chiseled away, in the background of my life and my upbringing, allowed me the space to get to know her before she actually passed away.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of appreciation and gratitude for the self-awareness that came through in that period of my life, because I think it really shifted the time that I was able to share with my mom before she passed away.
Yeah.
Saturn Returns, man. For whatever reason, when I started studying astrology, I thought like Saturn Returns, like, yes, the gate is going to open and I will see everything. But it really is more like that scene in the Neverending Story where the two Sphinx are there, and if you don't walk through with like the purity of heart, they're going to just like fry you. And that's really more what it's like. But for whatever reason, I had looked forward to it, with naivety.
Yeah, me too. And for my Saturn return, I was dealing with massive drug addiction, and it ultimately I ended up in a mental hospital for the first time in my life, not the last. So that was a really crazy process. I was going through a huge breakup at the time. Someone I was living with, she'd moved out, and like any fucking idiot guy, like as soon as she moved out, then I wanted the relationship to work and I wanted her back, but I was a fucking coke addict, and I had all kinds of issues on my own. So ultimately she moved on, and rightfully so, and I understand, and I never blamed her for it. But Saturn return.
Where does your Saturn sit? Where does your Saturn sit in your chart? I'm curious.
12th house, of course. So that's already its own complications there with the lifetime of trying to access that mystical, subconscious, deeper emotional energy. And I think ultimately somewhat failing until I recovered a little bit from that Saturn return, and then the psychic gateway started opening, Is it everybody? We're still rolling here. So what we did is Kat lives pretty far out there in Colorado in the mountains. So as we have all experienced in these past couple of years of COVID, Wi-Fi, man. Wi-Fi and Zoom and trying to keep the system rolling is not easy. So for the first 10 minutes, there's any delay or anything, from here on out, it should be better. And we're just going to keep the podcast going, the conversation flowing. And I got a lot more questions for Kat. So Kat, let's talk about astrology. So actually, before I even ask you a question, I want you to know that you were a pretty early person kickstarting my deep dive into astrology. Most people know me for doing tarot cards and life coaching and all that. And I've been doing tarot cards since I was a kid. My mom has the deck that she made that my grandma painted. And I'd always been interested in astrology, and I thought I knew a lot, but then you gave me a reading, even 6 months ago or something, 7 months ago. And I realized I didn't know anything about astrology after your reading. I was like, oh my God, this is so much more than just sun, moon, and rising. So, very inspirational. Tell me a little bit about your history of astrology, how you got going on all that.
Well, like you, I was attracted to the tarot system when I was a young girl. And as he had said, I do kind of live out in the middle of nowhere, so you might hear a rooster or a horse or something in the background. Yeah. But so as a kid, I grew up in Boulder, which is a very, it's a community that's open to a lot of different ideas. And I was interested in tarot, and I had collected a lot of different tarot decks, but I was kind of disenchanted by the book's meanings of the tarot, and how they kind of
I know what you mean.
Out.
Yeah.
And so I tucked them away for a long time, and then when I was in college, I had the opportunity to move, and I moved into an area that was in Northwest Denver, and I got this job at a local coffee shop that this gentleman came into every morning that soon became my friend. And he was a master astrologer and tarot reader and teacher of many different esoteric studies. And I was able to be gifted every holiday season a free tarot reading by him, which was really cool. And then after about the fourth year of this happening, because I'd worked for this coffee shop as a manager and different things, he invited me to study the tarot system as a means of self-study. And through the process of studying the tarot system and the apprenticeship that I went through with him for about 10 years, I drew 2 different tarot decks, and I also studied the foundations of the tarot system, which are numerology and astrology and all of these different esoteric systems. So that was my kind of initiation in looking at astrology. But my true study of it on my own really kicked in deeper last year when we had that big stellium, that major conjunction in Capricorn in January, on the 12th of January, 2020. And I started looking at it very differently. And part of that is what inspired an art form that I create now, which are these 3-dimensional orbs that I create with people's natal charts woven into them. And it's because I wanted to see what was going on astrologically in a 3-dimensional format rather than just on the screen or on a piece of paper. And that really made me look at the transits and how it affects us individually on a much bigger level, because I was able to match up really big shifts in my life to transits of a lot of the outer planets, more specifically than the closer inner planets. And the one big dog in the room was Uranus. After, of course, I reflected on Saturn and how I really didn't understand Saturn very much. Seeing Uranus when it showed up in Taurus, it really gave some notable conversations in that area of my chart. And so I started just reflecting on that more, and it deepened my study a lot more of astrology.
Yeah. I think transits are a huge eye-opening introduction to people to really get into astrology, because we all hear about the natal charts and those are fascinating. But when an astrologer can take the, transition of Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, or things like that, and tell you what happened to you in 2018, around the month of March or April, because I'm seeing something huge. And then somebody says, holy shit, that's when I got divorced, or like, that's when I ended up in the hospital. That's that kind of pseudoscience or actual science that turns people into real believers, because that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, what's so interesting to me is when I do events like day-long events at festivals and fairs, and I get to see a spitfire amount of people in one single day.
Yeah.
And what I like to do when I offer and give tarot readings to people is I like to look at their astrology transits that are going on for the next 6 months or, the next year, depending on what kind of reading they would like. And it's so fascinating to look at, square relationships, like this square relationship that's going on between Saturn and Uranus right now, and where that shows up in someone's natal chart and how that's reflected in the shifts and changes that are going on in their life. And it's just wild. Like these people that are often strangers have never told me anything about themselves whatsoever, and I can just look at how these different anchors have landed in areas of their chart and be able to, tell them, like, this is what you're working with. And it's so interesting because I think a lot of people, have this misconception that like all zodiac signs are the same, and that makes astrology rubbish, because that's ridiculous to think all Scorpios are the same.
Right.
Well, it is ridiculous to think that way. And what's so interesting that you don't always get with, the simplified form of horoscopes and astrology is that, there's a dial in that we have to put in perspective too. It's not just about the sun sign and the moon sign as like a definition. It's also about where it sits in this dial of our own chart, which tells us where these things are going to show up in our life. And that's what gives it its complexity. And once people realize there's this greater complexity and they can have it reflected in their own life, and they actually, see that there's a reason why it's been woven through time for thousands of years.
Right. Yeah, no, I know. It's incredible. Yeah, when you dive into it, like, it's embarrassing that in pop culture, all they know is the sun signs, it's like, oh yeah, Leos and Aquariuses shouldn't date or whatever. It's like, it's always used for just silly, like, romantic reasons, horoscope reasons. And like, when you dive deeper into it, it gets so complicated. Actually, I think overwhelmingly so. For astrology really separates a certain type of person in the world of spirituality, because it does become very scientific. It becomes extremely deep and very complicated. As soon as you're getting into solar arc and transits, composites, Davidson, synastry, like, oh my God, there's so much, that I even get overwhelmed with that.
Well, and it's interesting, I think the more we look at people's charts, we get this understanding of how these celestial bodies affect us. Like, my friend recently, had this conversation that was really out of the blue. But what was so interesting about it was that Mars and the sun were transiting his natal Uranus, like, that day, that happened to be in the third house. So it was like, it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. And I think if we can realize that there is this mathematic interaction of things in the realm of energies, then we can be like, we take things less personal when things shift, and we realize that there is actually like this weaving that's happening, and shifting that's happening, that's for a greater purpose, even though our egos don't like it all the time.
Right. So I got to ask you, so most people who come from a background of astrology and tarot, anything called esoteric mysticism, you talked about your mom earlier, but take me back a little further than that, because generally there's more going on, even from a young age, for people that are drawn to this kind of line of work.
So, I mean, I grew up in a Christian family. I was raised to be Christian. I found out later in life that my dad's side became devoutly Christian when my aunt had a tumor that was showing up along her spine. It was parallel her spine, and they wanted to do surgery, but the surgery was very risky. And so my grandmother prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, and the tumor reduced and went away. Ooh, and it made her devoutly Christian, and that was the story that I was given growing up. But then I found out later that my grandmother, when she was a child, instead of being dropped off to, say, a babysitter's house when her mom had to run an errand, she asked her mother to drop her off at various different churches. And it was because she herself, my grandma, who's since passed away a couple years ago, she wanted to find the pathway to God. And she wanted to find which church would give her that pathway, that direct pathway. So she had this very deep faith that she had carried with her in her entire life. And it's actually really interesting because, for whatever reason, like, as a kid, when I was interested in the tarot, I had this sense that it was not something I could share with my family, that I was interested in it. And so I felt like I really needed to hide this thing, especially because, of the witch association with tarot and anything esoteric. And then when I actually started going through my apprenticeship and drawing my deck, my mom was sick, and I went to visit her and share time with her in Michigan. And my uncle, my mom's brother, which granted my grandma that I'm referring to is on my dad's side, and so my mom's brother asked me, he was like, "Can I see your tarot deck?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he was like, or I didn't say I didn't know what you're talking about. I was like, how do you know anything about my tarot deck?
Yeah,
And
right.
he was like, well, your mom told me you were drawing this deck. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And he's like, did you know your grandfather read cards? And this is like my grandfather on my mom's side,
Right.
who we always called Whitey. And he, traveled around and was just a traveler. And apparently he read tarot through like a regular playing card deck, like just the regular,
Yeah.
1 through 10, ace, king, queen,
Right.
and he was taught how to read cards through his aunt. So all of a sudden I found out I was this third generation tarot reader, and I was like, well, that's weird. And I'd always wanted to hide it. And then my grandmother found out on my dad's side, the one that was devoutly Christian. She found out that I had this deck, and she asked me for a reading. And I was like, Grandma, I didn't think you'd ever be interested in anything like this.
Grandma, jeez.
Like, she's like, well, it's just another window to God. And it was so profound for her to say that, because I had felt so much judgment from a lot of my dad's side of the family through Christianity, just because I grew up in Boulder, and I, had friends that were Buddhists and friends that were atheists and friends that were of all these different backgrounds. And I had always had, for whatever reason, this understanding that like we all walk on the same earth, we all breathe the same air, we all drink the same water, unless we filter it, and then we drink better water. But in a lot of ways, like we all share in this experience, and these religions are just someone's like window to the sky where they're describing everything divine, and it's just like a snapshot. It's not like any one of them is better than another or truer than another, or they're just like another vantage point, looking at this divine world. And so, I just always had that understanding, but to get my grandmother's kind of approval, because she asked me for a reading as this devout Christian woman, that was a big shift for me, for reading cards and not feeling like I had to hide it so much anymore.
Yeah.
It was something my family supported, which just blew me away. I had no idea that would ever be the case.
Yeah.
But I have Saturn in my first house, and I have Virgo in my first house. So I have like a lot of like humbleness and like, hesitancy around the idea of like putting myself out in the world. And it's interesting to reflect on that and see that after understanding my own chart, after so many years.
Yeah. It's a common story too. A lot of people in the occult, New Age spirituality, come from a strong religious background. I think that there's a few things going on there. One of the biggest things is, I think, just studying theology when you're young really plants this strong foundation, whether it's mystical, religious, or spiritual, but it plants this thirst for knowledge and truth in a way that somebody who is raised agnostic or atheist, they just don't even have. So whether you stay Christian or whether you stay Jewish or Muslim or whatever, being raised with a certain level of theology just keeps those divine curiosities just flowing inside of you. I just happen to be in the minority that I was raised by a witch. So this shit was very common in my house. My mom spent her weekends kicking my sister and I out of the house because she had to teach her white light coven, basically kind of pagan initiation ceremonies in our living room, where all these women would dance around in their gowns, beating drums and doing tarot readings, talking about cosmology and astrology and all this shit. And I was really embarrassed about it when I was young, because this is the 80s, and I just I liked action movies, and I'm like, what the fuck is happening in my house? Single mom in white gowns, wearing like elf shoes, and all I wanted to do was play Little League.
They have hats.
Yeah. Dressed like Finn Rizal from Willow or something, I don't know, 80s reference. But I just wanted to surf and be like a normal kid. But as is the, it's like over time when I kind of found my own masculine way into that wasn't totally embarrassing. I thought it was kind of cool after a while, you know. It just took my own confidence. I didn't have any strong male figures growing up, so that was hard, just to only be surrounded by women in that way.
I think in that era, like, it wasn't so cool to be a witch, you know, as far as we were aware of. Like, now, I mean, I think when we were young or younger, you know, there was this like hidden aspect. Like, you had to do it in hiding, you had to do it behind the curtain. Whereas now, like, you know, people have Instagrams that are like modern day witch, you know, and we were like, I don't want to be some reflection of a past life, perhaps, that makes me a little reluctant to be right on stage with this, you know?
Oh, but my mom, I mean, she always claimed that she suffered from past life trauma for sorcery, witchcraft, everything occult. And you and I remember, because we're like, you know, old enough to, but in the 80s, there was this resurgence of what they called the satanic panic, you know, and it was this backlash to what was very spiritual and mystically open in the 1960s during the civil rights movement and the you know, anti-Vietnam War movement and all that, which really opened up the mystical floodgates for counterculture. By the time the 80s came, and you know, this kind of conservatism washed over the land, Ronald Reagan's president, then there's all these like kind of morality groups out trying to shut down this like occult revival. And here's my mom in like 1984, 85, right in the center of this, with two kids, basically, you know, conducting ritualistic ceremonies in our living room with her coven, and all the women in the neighborhood being like, oh, these kids are, you know, this is a son of a witch and all that. It was, you know, there's tension, palpable tension for sure, you know?
Oh, I bet. I mean, especially as a kid, you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't invite them over to my house during the hours of like, this time and this time, you know?
Right.
Because they'll see things and they'll question the things that they see. Yeah, the light just changed here, so it's like, whoosh.
Yeah, it looks cool though. I mean, I think it looks great. Like, it's yeah, you're totally like, it looks like film noir. You're blown out on this side, and then it's like all dark on that side. Yeah, little German expressionist lighting for the podcast. So yeah, how did this, like, kind of, before you were accepted by your family, you know, when you found out you come from a legacy, third generation and all that, what about like in high school and things like that? How did it affect like relationships with guys, relationships with friends, just kind of being this closet mystic?
Well, you know, I mean, I think as teenagers, we're all interested in a lot of different things and we check out things, but I did have like one stint of playing with the Ouija board with a friend, and we got really freaked out by that. And then she started seeing things, and then of course the things that she started seeing kind of freaked me out a little bit.
But who was that started seeing things? Your friend?
My friend that I played the Ouija board with.
Okay.
Then we you know, we grew up in Boulder, and of course there's different dry riverbeds and different places in Boulder that kids hang out in. And back then there was a lot more abandoned buildings, and whereas now a lot of those places have been remodeled and modernized. And so I remember we were walking through this dry creek bed, and we found what seemed like, you know, someone's sacrifice or some satanic thing, you know. And of course that freaked us out because it was perfect timing of when we were working with the Ouija board. And so we put that away. We stopped working with that. And I think that was honestly around the same time I stopped working with the tarot, and I just tucked it away. But there were instances, you know, when I would have really intense dreams and like almost like prophetic psychic dreams and
tell me one.
Intuitive things around my kids. Well, so for whatever reason, when I was a kid, I would have dreams where I would be able to fly. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't something that it was like, oh, now I'm going to go on this adventure and fly. It would be more of a situation where I'd be out with my friends and we'd be in the foothills of Boulder, and we'd just be, you know, mousing around on the foothills and on these boulders and rocks. And then I would just run to run up some boulder, and I would just kick off into the sky. And all of a sudden I was flying, but I wasn't flying in the way that like we see Superman fly, you know, where it's like, oh, this is where I'm going. It was falling upwards. It was like I was being removed from this gravitational pull, and I was just being almost pulled to another plane of some sort. And then of course that would freak me out.
Yeah.
In the dream, and I would wake up. And a lot of these times when I would wake myself up, it was as if I wasn't in my body yet, and so I'd be feeling the sensation of being paralyzed inside of my body. And I'd have to focus as hard as I possibly could to put my energy on just like a single finger to move that. And then I knew once I could like move a finger, I could break the hold and be able to move my entire body again and not be paralyzed. And this happened several times, like probably over the course of many years, until one of the times I had this sense that instead of waking myself up out of fear, I was going to grab onto something. And I ended up grabbing onto what looked like a branch on a tree that was suspended in the middle of like the sky on a clump of dirt, you know, just like this island tree.
Yeah.
out in the atmosphere. And it was this green kind of dusky colored sky instead of being blue. And I was just hanging there, and as I was looking into the distance, this speck eventually like made its way to me, and it looked as if it was this it looked like it was a sperm. It looked like it had this tail and this big head, but when it got up close to me, it looked like the face was just so creviced in such a way and so deeply that the face itself was like mountain ranges on their cheekbones, and like it was the terrain of the earth on this being's face that came up to me in the atmosphere. And it said to me, "There's only 6 heliophiliacs left." And I woke up. I just was so startled by that statement. I had no idea what it meant, and it just forced me awake. And of course I was paralyzed in my body, or that was my sensation. And when I finally broke it, because I could hear my brother, I could hear that he just got home, and I could hear things going on in the house, but I wasn't yet in my body. When I finally broke it, I walked into my brother's room, and he mentioned that he thought I looked like I had seen a ghost. And I was like, I don't know what I saw, you know? And it took me a number of months to actually even recall the word that this being had said to me. I could remember the beginning and I could remember the end, but I couldn't remember the entire word. And then it came to me while I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I was like, heliophiliacs. And he was like, what is that? What was that word? And I was like, heliophiliacs. Like, it's this word that was said to me in this dream, and I have no idea what it means. And he's like, it sounds Latin. And I was like, is it? Because I have no idea. Like, it just was said to me. And his father happened to be a Latin professor. And so he said he was going to go home and ask his dad what this meant. And he called me that night, and he told me that it's Helio, which is the brightest star. Our sun is often called Helio, like we're in a heliosphere. And Philiac was of the bright, like of this being. So it was like there's 6 beings that are of this brightest star, or 6 beings of the sun. And it continues to be a riddle for me, you know, that I carry through life, because it was just such a profound experience. But it, you know, I think things like that are really important to carry with us, because they give a texture to what we're going through that we may not, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't remember all of my dreams all the time. So when I do, it's really profound when I do remember them.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I've been doing a lot of starseed interviews, and you know, there's the Lyrans and the Pleiadians, and among others, Octarians and things like that. And I've been talking to a few of these people, and I'm like, I feel very comfortable here on Earth. Like I feel like a child of the sun, you know, Helio. So that's interesting. I wonder. There's only 6 heliophiliacs, but I'm pretty confident guy. So I wonder if I'm one of the 6. You know, I don't know, but I definitely feel like my star is not some you know, different star system or anything like that. It's also Leo energy too. Like I feel very connected to the sun. I feel at my peak when I'm like riding in the desert beneath the sun, or when I'm like, I surfed for a long time in my life, and I just loved sitting in the water beneath the sun, because then you get the water and the fire energy combined. So I want to look more into heliophiliacs and find out, you know, who these the chosen 6 are, and you know, I don't know, Kat. Maybe that's something that we share. Who knows? I'm inserting myself into your prophetic vision there, but
All right, that's all right. We'll look into it. We'll look into it more. It's definitely, I mean, it's, you know, we consider, you know, I'm getting ready to have a birthday. And so anytime we approach our birthdays, we look at how long we've been on this earth and what we've experienced. And every once in a while, when we're in conversation with people, we'll share an experience that we had. And people can be dumbfounded sometimes by the experiences that we've gone through, but we've just been kind of swimming up current, and we don't always reflect on what we've overcome and what we've gone through to get to where we are, you know. And
yeah,
then to consider how long we've been on this earth and how many nights we've slept and how many times we've dreamed, and you know that there can be a few dreams that we carry with us for so long that can continue to offer us information.
yeah.
You know, it's like a precious treasure that we can take out and look at and reflect on again and again, and look at in a new way, almost like a little crystal, you know.
Yeah, I was having a lot of visions like that when I was in the hospital over the past 3 years. You know, I might have told you one a long time ago, but if you forgot, I don't blame you, because I don't know who I say to what anymore. I've been on so much medication for such a long time. But I had this download of this, you know, like intergalactic coven called the Children of the Stars, you know, and I didn't know, I still don't know what it is or who it is. I have theories, and I keep kind of circulating through different people, wondering if they're part of this and if anyone knows anything about this. And mostly I've just gotten strange looks and head scratching, like, you know, who the fuck are you? Like, don't worry about it, man. If you know, you know. But it's kind of been like my calling card. If this makes sense to anyone else out there, like, you know, what this could possibly be, or what the message is, or who the collective is, or, you know, something like, you know, it's, but the download came to me very clearly. I knew that this was something that was going to be part of a mysterious journey for me, as the only movie I can equate it to is like Field of Dreams. You know, it's like you get this calling, and you know there's other people involved, but you have no fucking idea who they are or how it all fits together. But you know, there's this like whisper, you know, and it reminds me of the heliophiliac thing. It's like this something that's been haunting you your whole life, and you know, it's like whether you're consciously aware of it or not, it's always in the back of your mind. And there's so many things I assume happened to you in your life that are little breadcrumbs, or little like suggestive clues that may be some indication of what the heliophiliacs are, or how you fit into that. Is that right?
Well, it's so interesting because I think that's like our first instinct, you know, and that was my first one, is to be like, well, am I one of these? Are they, you know, are they humans? What are they? And just now, as you were speaking, I got this totally different insight and impression that came in, because, you know, we think about the planetary system as well, and they are beings of the brightest star. And so, you know, recently I started looking more at transits and when they're started. You know, like recently we've been experiencing this conjunction between Mars and the Sun, which starts this new cycle of Mars, because Mars takes about 2 years to move around the planetary system before it meets back up with the Sun again. And what is the journey of this being, the planet of Mars, as it travels through the solar system, and how does that reflect on us as it lands in these different areas of our chart and also crosses paths with these other beings? And it's interesting because right now, as we've been talking, I'm like, oh, was it referring to astrology, or was it referring to like human beings, like star seeds? Is it referring to and that's the beauty of the riddle, right? Is that it's like something that continues to be a question, because I think the moment we think we have the answer, we stop looking. And that's the beauty of like this, random riddle that I was given as a kid, is that it keeps this question open. It's like, what is this? Am I going to meet people that are going to enhance my study of astrology? Am I going to pair up with a number of people and we're going to be like, the Power Rangers of astrology, or
right. Combined forces.
Yeah, like what does that look like? Or
fire, water.
Right, we're like Mars, Venus, like what does that look like? And so it's a question that I continue to sit with, because I don't have an answer for it. And it's it is something that I pose in front of people who study different esoteric things. I'm like, have you ever heard of this? Like, there's this weird riddle I was given as a teenager, and you're one of the first people that's spoken up and been like, at least said something that was even comparable, that's, talking about the children of the star, and it's like similar language, but different. And so it's intriguing.
Well, it's 100%, because it is almost a Latin translation into English of what heliophylax is. It doesn't have the bright side, the angle, the brightness that you're talking about, but it's a very similar translation. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and we see the stars as a light object, in darkness, and the sun is the brightest star. Right? It's not even a planet; it's considered a star. So that's interesting, it is. And that's why, when you had told me that, it was very profound to me. I'm like, wait, there's something here that's similar,
Yeah. Totally. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's fascinating. I got all kinds of crazy downloads when I was in the hospital, and it's not as dramatic as people think. Like, I'd love to say it was, on fucking Mount Sinai and like the voice of God was speaking down to me, but it's not like that. It's more, there is this fine line between what is your imagination and what you're channeling as a conduit. And that line, especially in a liminal environment like the hospital, becomes very unclear, because a hospital is, it's a fucking gateway between our world and the spirit world. You're in a room that people go into to die, essentially. Not every day, but many people have died, in that environment, in that building. That it's a industry of death, And so when I was there, it's like you're part of the collective experience of whatever's going on deep inside of your own 12th house mystical subconscious realm, as well as those thoughts of life and death that every other person there brings with them into that experience. So it's just this wildly open, mystical kind of gateway between two different worlds. And also, you're on a lot of medication. Sometimes you're on oxygen. You're on all kinds of reality enhancing things, stimulants or downers or whatever. So I would just sit there, and I was alone the whole time too. I was always alone, and I would just sit there, and all the thoughts of, creation, the cosmos, deities, life purpose, soul paths, twin flames, like everything, star seeds, everything would just flood right through me. And that's when the real spiritual activation began. I was hospitalized for the first time when I was 37. I'm 40 now, and whatever I thought I knew about spirituality was nothing compared to that experience, when just the floodgates started opening up, and I just started feeling everything in this real like clairsentient kind of way, you know, for the first time in my life. I'm like, I feel everything, like a fucking like an X-Men mutant, you know, is like discovering his own power or something. He's like, what the fuck is this? Like everywhere I turn I can feel everything, like the nurse, my heart, my senses, like the people rolling the carts in the hallway, you know. Okay, end of my TED talk. Back to you.
Well, no, and I bet, you know, I mean, plus you live in an environment that has a lot of stimulation, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you live in a place that has so much different, you know, I call it noise, but even that word can have connotations that like are negative, but like there's
Right.
so much sound in so many different layers and textures and intensities in a city environment. And that was a really big shift that happened for me when I moved into, you know, this really rural environment, and like the loudest thing is crickets, you know, at night, and some of them are even louder than normal crickets, and you're like, whoa, that's the orchestra cricket, like,
Yeah.
you're loud. But to not hear ambulances all the time, whereas you went from an environment where you had all that stimulation, and then you went into this hospital room where, you know, there's still a lot of stimulation, but it's like brought in this closer context. So you're hyper aware of, like, you know, the cart going down the hallway is like a car, you know.
Yeah. 100%.
It's like a different traffic. It's, you know, different sounds, and that's mercurial, right? Like that's our desire to want to define our environment and describe it and name it. So like it's so instant, like you hear a sound and your brain wants to be like window shutting, door shutting, screen door, coyote, grasshopper, you know, like it just wants this language to be able to describe it and define it. And then you go into this environment where everything's brought a lot closer, and it's your sound, it's like your awareness is heightened because so much of the normal white noise has gone away, and you have different white noise, you know.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's like, and there's so many machines, and it's so interesting that, you know, like what you brought up, that there's just layers and layers upon experiences of people who have been there and have either like survived or passed away, and all of the questions that people have sat with in that environment, you know, because like we are emotional beings, and when you sit in that environment and you're vulnerable and you're raw and you're open, like you're gonna sense a lot more than maybe a nurse that is like going from one patient to the next, because their awareness is on that, and your awareness was on a totally different level energetically, you know.
Yeah, a very passive level too, you know, because a nurse is very active. They're in work mode. As a patient, it's people who know me know that I can't sit still. You know, it's not ADD. Maybe it is, but it's not consciously ADD. It's just I have a lot of energy. I need to move. I need to do shit. And one of the biggest struggles of my autoimmune disease is having to turn that off and do fucking nothing. And like I have laid in a hospital bed for up to 9 days without getting up, you know, outside of going to the bathroom or whatever. And it's like, that is so counterintuitive to me, because it's like we were talking about honing in that mercurial way on all the noise and trying to create logic out of it or whatever. One way that's activated is because you've removed the physical body. So now like the mind, the senses of the mind is completely heightened because I'm just sitting there like a potato, you know? So it starts and same with emotions too, like emotions, logic, all that kind of stuff now become the heightened state as your physical body like atrophies, you know? It's a wild experience, and I'm a very physical person. So I had to like totally readjust to that. And I think that opened up a lot of spiritual, mystical gateways.
It's interesting because, you know, like as you had said, where our attention is can like bring awareness to one sense more than another, or one aspect of the body more than another. And particularly, you know, like our mind, body, emotion relationship and how, if something is disrupted emotionally or even mentally, you can lean into the physical body in movement and exercise to help shift things that are stagnant in the emotional world and in the physical world, because it's chemistry, and the physical movement and exercise like moves through that. But when you take away that tool, then you are left with just like the tools of the mind and the emotions, like weighing and measuring things and defining things. It's like these two forces instead of three forces. And it's so interesting, what we can learn about ourselves when we can like figure out when to engage certain tools that we have and like when not to, you know. But when you're in that situation where you're really like confined to being able to only do certain things, it's so important in regard to where you put your attention, because that can make or break us. It's pivotal to our experience.
Yeah. It's interesting. Before this conversation, I've never thought about that side of it before. Like, when is a warrior going to learn telepathy? When the warrior can't use his body? You know what I mean? That's when you go from Luke to Yoda. You know what I mean? It's like when you no longer have the temple or the shell or whatever, that's when you start going deeper within. And then you're like, oh, I never needed the body in the first place. The power is stronger than any one facet, like mind, body, spirit, or heart. It actually, the power or whatever it is, runs through all different aspects of our being.
It's interesting. I don't know if this has come up for you recently, but I'll find myself like having a thought, and then within 5 to 10 minutes, like it will have been actualized. Like, for instance, I've been helping my friend here up at the farm with packing CSA, like membership shares of fruits and vegetables and stuff throughout the season. And this last week, she ended up having to like short me on a squash. And so she's like, I'll bring it to you next week. I'm like, okay, no problem. Well, yesterday I just got this thought of like, oh, I wonder when she's going to bring me that squash. And within 5 minutes, she showed up and she was at my front door and she's like, I have that squash for you. But I didn't have to call her to remind her. It was just like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, did I have that awareness because she was getting in the car with the squash? Or did like my thought of, I wonder where that squash is, give her the intuition to like bring over the squash? It's like, I don't know, but it was really interesting that it happened within 5 minutes of me having this thought, and there's a lot of situations that seem to be happening like that recently with me. And I don't know, for instance, if that's related to where Uranus is, because it's in opposition to where I have all these planets in Scorpio. And so I'm getting these epiphanies, or if it's just like a sign of the times changing and we're all becoming more telepathic.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All the above. It's all the above.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely moving into a new age. I mean, that's written in the stars too, But yeah, I mean, it's like it's time for like this collective cultural activation now. I mean, I can feel it everywhere. The old paradigms, the power structures, and all that, they are falling away, and it's just time for this kind of mass collective ascension. Now, I still believe in 3D reality. I do believe that we are in the incarnation that we're in for karmic lessons, Chiron, Saturn, all kinds of different variables, but within that, kind of the confines of 3D, we are going to start seeing some fifth dimensional thinking, like really elevate, the human race, if you will. It's going to be it's going to be an interesting experience.
So I'm curious, because like when my nephew, like right before he was 5, he fell out of the second story window, and he was put into an induced coma, and that was really like my calling to task, as far as like if I really cared how people defined me,
Yeah.
because I was like, I'm going to bring everything to the table for this kid. And I don't care if anybody calls me a witch or, whatever they want to call me. I'm going to bring crystals in, and I'm going to call on archangels, and I'm going to be doing different energetic work around him. And I don't care what people say about me, because
Right.
I'm going to give this kid everything I have. And when he came out of a coma and got out of that experience, because he had to relearn how to walk, and it was a very traumatic experience for him, and it still is, even though he's now 21 years old, it's still something he deals with because he has a brain injury. But he had said that when he was in a coma, he knew that he would be okay because he saw these three lights, like these three beings that were watching over him. And it was interesting to me because I was calling on Archangel Raphael, Archangel Michael, and Kuan Yin to watch over him all the time. But my father's family, being devoutly Christian, they were like, oh, that's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Like, these are the three beings that were watching over him. But did you have any experiences like that? Like, were you ever in a coma? Like, were you ever in a coma when you were in the hospital? Like, did you ever see, entities that assured you that you would be okay?
No.
Yourself?
No, I never saw entities. I only saw, I saw tunnels, I saw lights, but no figures. I was bummed about that. I wanted to see fucking entities, man. Like, come on, like, where are my guides when I need them? I've been doing all kinds of lives, like, really upset with my guides lately because I feel like they're just kind of, twiddling their thumbs and sitting this one out. I'm like, dudes, guys, I need you right now, like, and gals too. I have one really strong masculine guide, one really strong feminine guide, and I could use a little help with this autoimmune disease to get me out of the woods, but I guess there's still some more Chiron-like shit I have to learn, with it being in my Taurus and what house? 8th house? Yeah, in the 8th house. Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of lessons that, So I'm working on it. But I wish I had, though. I wanted to see guides. I do talk to my spirit guides outside of those near-death experience kind of situations, but at that moment in my life, I don't know if it was me or them, but for some reason we all weren't showing up for each other. So.
Well, I mean, I think for him, he was also in a coma, so he
was there.
He was like in that induced state, so it wasn't something that. I mean, he was in a state that we didn't know how he was going to come out of it. To be quite honest, it was profound for us all, especially for him, being 5 years old.
Well, yeah, well, and I actually want to wrap up on that note because I think you did have a massive effect, influence, and healing hand in that, because those were essentially the three guides in whatever form and whatever body or incarnation they took. That was your energy. That was your energy that you cast into the situation to heal him and bring him out of the coma. And I want to remind anybody listening that you are a healer and you're very good at this stuff. And I've always been very impressed with you since we first met with your astrology reading. And I've talked to you a number of times in depth about other things. And so on that note, why don't you just give us all your information, how people can book with you, how they can reach you, and we'll wrap it up there with Kat the Healer. I think that's the best note to end this on.
Oh, you're so sweet. It's so I am certified in clinical aromatherapy, herbalism, and nutrition, and then I'm also a practicing astrologer and tarot reader. So you can see more about my services on my webpage, which is rootsofalchemy.com. I also have some of my blog posts on there. And then I have a YouTube channel, which I'll offer daily tarot. And then I also offer some medicine making classes, which is Delaney's Well. My Instagram plug is Delaney's _ well, as well as Roots of Alchemy. I make these astrology orbs, as I had kind of referenced earlier. And you can see a lot of those orbs on my Instagram pages if you're interested in ordering them. And you're also welcome to reach out to me personally at my email, rootsofalchemy@gmail.com if you'd like to schedule a reading as well.
That is awesome. And please do schedule a reading with Kat. She is amazing. She did a full 3-hour astrological natal chart reading for me, and that kickstarted my whole astrological journey before Missy became my mentor and taught me everything. I learned it from Kat first. So yeah, amazing. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Goodbye, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.